Hi, my name's Darren. I went to see Avengers Infinity War this morning, and after I came out of the cinema, I really felt compelled to make a video about it. So, just to apologize in advance for the poor production values, this literally is a guy just talking to his phone. And this is also going to be a spoiler full review, so you've been warned. So, I honestly approached Avengers Infinity War with a fair degree of trepidation. I mean, this was a film that had been hyped, that had been built up to be the culmination of 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, right? So there's a fair degree of expectation on this film, and I was honestly pleasantly surprised. This was a good film. It was a really fun, enjoyable film. It was an exciting film, and it was a surprisingly tense film. It was pretty tense. Like, for the entirety of its running time, you were kind of like on the edge of your seat, which was really cool. It had an interesting villain for once. The villain is actually one of the film's really strong points. And ultimately, the film works because it kind of all just hangs together, right? You actually have quite a sort of convoluted plot, but it all kind of fits together, and, you know, the character moments kind of make it still work, and it plays really well. Ultimately, I kind of feel like this film is the distillation of that sort of Marvel Cinematic Universe style of movie making. I mean, they didn't lie. This is the distillation of 10 years of Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. So what do I mean by that sort of Marvel style of filmmaking? If you really think about it, at their heart, all of these Marvel films are just really fun action films. They've got these crazy, over-the-top plots. They've got sort of fun sort of dialogue weaved into it. But most importantly, they have relatable, interesting characters. These are characters that you want to see more of. You want to hang out with them, right? Because they're fun. Now, most of the Marvel films kind of live or die on the strength of those characters. And this film in particular absolutely relies on that. And to be honest, the reason why it can work in this film is because they've had 10 years worth of filmmaking previously, because all of that previous character development has been done. We don't need any more exposition. We don't need to be introduced to Captain America or Iron Man or any of these guys. We know who these guys are, right? And so we can just see them interact. Now, there are heaps of these really fun, poignant character moments within the film, right? So you've got kind of like Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. You see in the trailer, they've got that fun little interaction. You know, that you've got like really poignant moments, like when Captain America comes to visit Rhodey, right? Comes to visit War Machine, who was crippled basically in Civil War. And they have this sort of reconciliation moment, right? You know, when Iron Man gets out his phone and he's got this weird old flip phone with Captain America's number in it, you kind of feel, you kind of understand why it's hard for him to make that call. All these really cool, like fun little character moments are only possible because of all these previous Marvel films and the way those characters has been established in the past. Now, what makes Infinity War different is that it adds an extra level of intensity and stakes to that. And it does it basically by, by killing guys off. So basically, within the first 10 minutes of the film, a couple of major characters die. So just a warning again, this is a spoiler review, right? So, within the first 10 minutes, Heimdall gets capped. He gets stabbed. He's gone. And then, basically, immediately after that, in order to save Thor's life, Loki is killed by Thanos, right? And that's a big character. Loki, Tom Hiddleston's character, he's a really well-liked villain. I mean, some people say he's really the only developed villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And he gets killed within the first 10 minutes. So immediately, it establishes that there's stakes in this movie. So you couple that with these poignant character moments, like with a character like Iron Man. Now, throughout 10 years worth of history, we've kind of seen the Iron Man character grow. He kind of starts off as like a little boy with his toys, and by the time he's in this movie, he has a position of responsibility. And you kind of see him take on that responsibility as like a de facto leader of the Avengers, and also in his personal life, right? He wants to become engaged or get married to Pepper Potts, right? And that has thematic resonance because of everything that's kind of gone on in the past and because he's a really likable guy. We want Tony Stark to survive. We want him to kick ass and make snarky quips, right? Like, this is what we want out of Tony Stark. So when, for example, Tony Stark jumps onto an alien spaceship in order to try to stop it, to save Earth, and he calls his wife, basically, while he's on the alien spaceship to let her know, look, I might not actually make it back from this, but I'm doing it to protect everybody, right? That has real emotional resonance. It doesn't take half an hour to establish that. All of that character development is done. All it takes is that little character moment, right? It feels really satisfying. And this film is littered with those little character moments. And I think that's really what makes this film ultimately quite successful. To be fair, there are times when those character interactions don't quite work. And I would say, and this might be controversial, I don't really think that the Scarlet Witch's interaction with a Vision is particularly strong, because we get introduced to these two characters in Age of Ultron, I think. That's when they kind of first get born, essentially. And then in Captain America Civil War, we kind of see a little bit of interaction with them. We kind of see them flirting. And then in this film, they're basically in a full-on relationship, right? Like, to be honest, they haven't really had that much screen time. They've kind of just been forced together, right? Bang. Scarlet Witch and the Vision, they must have a relationship. And it's, like, to be honest, it's important. Their relationship is important for the plot of the film. But it doesn't feel as weighty as some of the other relationships that are in the film. I mean, it's a small weakness because, look, to be honest, the Scarlet Witch Vision relationship is okay. I mean, it's not horrible, but it definitely feels less significant than the relationships that have been built up for 10 years in previous Marvel films. So I think another core reason why this film is so successful is how it all kind of hangs together. It's a film that has a lot going on, right? Like, you look at the movie poster and there's like 1,000 characters sitting on that movie poster. And you kind of think to yourself, how are you possibly going to have a plot that fits all of these people in and it's still a coherent plot and it's not just paying lip service to these guys, right? But, they've actually made it's a long film, right? It's a 2-hour, 40-minute film. But to be honest, throughout the entirety of that, you're engaged, right? It's exciting for the entire running time. And all of the subplots, even though they are sort of classic Marvel over-the-top sort of subplots, they're kind of meaningful in their own little way. And the way the film is written is that all of these little subplots end up tying together really well, right? It all ends up tying together onto Titan, right? Where they have this big final fight with Thanos, right? All of the different components mean something. So when you have Peter and the Guardians guys running off to one corner to sort of accomplish one goal, and then you have Thor, and then you have Thor running off to accomplish his own goal, and then you have Captain America and the guys who are staying on Earth trying to accomplish some other goal, right? All of this feels like while it's not sort of coordinated in the sense that they're not teams that are coordinating with each other, it all kind of makes sense in terms of this threat that Thanos is posing, right? Like, all of these individual components make sense. And more than that, they kind of gradually sort of combine together in sort of like a really organic way. It doesn't feel like forced the way the different characters end up colliding back together again. So, look, to be honest, a lot of credit should be given to the way this film is written. I mean, a lot of the flaws of the film are kind of covered up because of the nice sort of character interactions, but the script and the plot are serviceable enough that, you're not really made to question these sorts of things, right? I think that in these sorts of films, one of the great litmus tests of whether the film's plot works is whether you're sitting in the cinema actively questioning the absurdity of the plot, right? If you are bought into the internal logic of the film, then that film is successful. If you're sitting there going, come on, how is this guy getting from here to here? And, why is this happening? Then clearly the film's internal logic isn't working. And to this film's credit, the internal logic works. All of the stuff, you never sort of question this sort of stuff. You never question Thor getting into a big galaxy forge, getting like hit by a supernova essentially to forge a new hammer axe thing, right? It's just like, hey, that makes sense. He needs that to kill Thanos. You never really question the whole like Captain America sitting in Wakanda trying to get the yellow stone out of the Vision's head. And then they have this, like, if I genuinely sit back and think about it, they've got this really dumb strategy where they have an impenetrable wall and they decide to open it up. It makes no sense. But during the film, you don't question that. And that is why this film is successful. Because it's so engaging and the way the plot is done is handled subtly enough that you're not made to question it and you're bought into it. So I think, yes, absolutely, a lot of credit should go to how well this film hangs together overall. Now, something else that I think is really well done in this film, and something that, hasn't really been very well done in previous Marvel films, is how good Thanos is as a villain. He's a compelling villain, right? He's fleshed out as a villain. Like, in many ways, Avengers Infinity War is actually Thanos' character arc. It's really about Thanos, right? He's not some sort of one-dimensional mustache twirling like, oh, I hate babies and I want to kill everything. He has a genuine motivation and he sacrifices in order to achieve his goal. In the same way that heroes sacrifice things, they self-sacrifice to save people, Thanos also sacrifices things that are important to him in order to achieve his goal, right? He has an ideology. It's not just he's some crazy guy who's going around killing people. So when I think about Thanos, he's actually this sort of Malthusian superhero. And so it's basically like, this idea that we live in a galaxy or an Earth or a universe or whatever it is, where there's limited resources, right? And then life in this galaxy or universe will basically continue to multiply if it's successful. And it will basically get to a point where the amount of life outstrips the amount of resources that are available to support that life. And as a result of that, disease, war, famine, all this sort of bad stuff occurs, right? Because there's all these people competing for limited resources. Now, Thanos basically has this sort of Malthusian philosophy, which is that, look, I know this to be true, and I want to avoid the cruelty and the suffering that occurs when war, famine, etc. occur. So instead, I'm just going to preempt this. When populations get to a certain stage, I'm just going to go into a society and randomly eliminate 50% of the population, right? Look, obviously, if you stand back, it is crazy, right? But within this character's logic, it works, right? Because basically, in some ways, Thanos sees himself as like a universal gardener. I'm just pruning the trees so that the trees can actually grow better in the future. So there's a motivation there, right? And more than that, he's not necessarily seen as a cruel guy. He's not doing this because he likes to kill people. Like, at no point in the film do you think he's like some sort of crazed maniac who just delights in torture and cruelty, right? Basically, for him, he's doing it because he thinks it's important for the universe. So you have these really interesting character moments, right? For example, when the Guardians, like Gamora is his daughter, and basically in this film, it's established that Gamora is the most important thing to Thanos, right? His daughter is the most important thing to him. So when the Guardians and Gamora attack Thanos on the Collector's planet, nowhere, I think. Yeah, that place. So when the Guardians attack him, Thanos, look, to be honest, he should instantly be able to kill them like that, right? But instead, you have this really weird character moment where it's almost like Gamora bring her boyfriend to see her dad. And basically, Thanos has this moment where he tests Peter kind of to test the boyfriend's mettle. It's kind of like, look who's coming to dinner with like alien overlords. It's really interesting and fun. And it's only possible because you kind of slowly see that Thanos is not just some crazy maniac. And the truth is, he sacrifices. He sacrifices as well, right? He sacrifices Gamora in order to achieve his ends. And it's shown in the film that this is not an easy sacrifice, right? Because basically for him to attain the Soul Stone kind of knows what is important to somebody, right? So for him to legitimately obtain the Soul Stone, he has to do something that genuinely hurts him. He has to genuinely give up something that he loves. It can't be an act. It can't be some sort of like sociopathic sort of fakery, right? Because basically it's implied that the Soul Stone will know. So he gives up, he kills Gamora essentially so that he can obtain the Soul Stone. And there's resonance in that because it kind of feels like he crosses this threshold. Once he's done that, absolutely, I have to achieve my goals because I basically sacrificed too much, right? So I think as a villain, he's a really interesting, fleshed out villain. And honestly, this film is his film. Like at the end of the film, when you watch the end of the credits crawl, right? Instead of having, the usual, the Avengers will return, they instead have Thanos will return. And it absolutely makes sense because this film is about Thanos. I think one of the most interesting moments in the film is right towards the end. Basically, the resolution of this film is that Thanos wins, right? He gathers all the stones into his gauntlet and he clicks his fingers and 50% of the universe's population ends, right? They just cease to exist. It's a really, really clever way to end the film, right? The film ends and it's quiet, right? You know that the Avengers have lost. Thanos has won, right? That's how this film ends. But it's still a really satisfying ending. Anyway, so the way this film ends for Thanos is that he gets injured and he basically, the next scene you see him in is a scene which I can only imagine is a metaphor for his own inner consciousness, right? And there's a scene basically where he is talking to a young Gamora, which is basically his conscience. And his conscience basically asks him, well, I mean, was it worth it? Have you kind of achieved what you need to achieve? And then the following scene is him basically teleporting himself to this idyllic Arcadian, like, countryside paradise, right? He has this little log cabin set up in the woods somewhere with like green lush hills, and he sits there like basically a kind old man sort of looking off into this vista, kind of feeling like I've done what I came to achieve, right? This is the right thing to do. It's a really odd but powerful way to, like, it's not a sort of standard villain resolution, right? But it's basically meant to show that in Thanos' mind, he is not the bad guy. He's a good guy. Now, obviously, like, it's crazy, right? His plan is crazy. But, like, in a film like this, to establish a villain that actually has a strong motivation, that you actually feel some sort of resonance with, it's pretty rare. And it's actually one of the real differentiators of this film, and it makes it work really, really well. So I think the flip side to how well Thanos works is kind of how poorly done his lieutenants are. So he's got these 4 guys, and I don't even know their names. I don't think their names are actually ever even introduced. There's like Lady, Big Dude, Spear Guy, and like Wizard. I don't know who they are. Anyway, they're these aliens that have powers. They're Thanos' lieutenants, right? These guys, these 4 guys are basically stock standard, like, Bond villain sidekicks, essentially, right? They don't really have a character apart from being sort of menacing, evil villains. So that is probably a more classic sort of Marvel villain, I guess. But yeah, those guys aren't well done. But Thanos, he's really well done. So now I just want to talk about some of the really cool moments that I felt were in this film. Now, I think one of the coolest moments for me was kind of the bait and switch when it came to the disappearance of characters. So basically, right at the end of the film, Thanos snaps his fingers, and 50% of the universe's population basically ceases to exist. It's not that they never existed, it's just that immediately at that point in time, they just disappear, right? So Thanos has got what he wants, right? You have less population fighting for resources. There's no like war or famine or anything like that that causes it. It's just clean, right? They just cease to exist, and the universe is in balance again, basically, as far as he's concerned. Now, the first characters to kind of disappear are not really main characters from films. So you have characters like Bucky and Falcon just disappear into thin air. Now, obviously, this is a major occurrence, right? Like, Bucky and, the Falcon, they're cool characters. I love them, right? But the reality is that they're kind of like side characters to the whole Captain America thing, right? And Captain America doesn't disappear. So you're kind of, immediately, they've kind of established, oh, we'll get rid of the side characters. And that's what you're thinking, right? But they'll just get rid of all these side characters. But then they do this bait and switch where Black Panther rocks up to the female guard that he has, right? And you think that she is about to disappear. He holds out his hand, and then the camera turns, and she stays, and Black Panther disappears. And you're like, what? What is going on here? How is Black Panther disappearing? He just wasn't he in the highest grossing film of all time or something? That guy cannot disappear. And then all of a sudden, you have major characters just cease to exist. So Doctor Strange, poof, he's gone. Spider-Man, gone, right? Basically, all of the Guardians, except Rocket Raccoon, gone. It's a really confronting part of the film, and it's really cleverly done, because it's kind of like, there's that bait and switch moment, and the bait and switch really blows your mind. So basically, you've had a film where up to this point, you've had major characters dying, right? Important characters, like Loki, genuinely dying. And then the sort of climax of the film is that heaps of characters that you don't see coming just straight up disappear. Now, look, I have no doubt that their deaths are not permanent. I have no doubt that their deaths are not permanent. But, it's still a really interesting scene. So the other really interesting, cool moment for me was how many excellent hero moments there are in the film, like hero entrance moments, right? Now, I think with a lot of these superhero films, I can really tell the films that I'm invested in when the hero rocks up, you feel a sense of relief. There's so much tension that's been building up, and when the hero actually comes to save the day, you're like, thank God that guy is here. Thank God for that guy. Now, the last time I genuinely got that feeling was probably during The Dark Knight Rises, right? So in The Dark Knight Rises, Batman's been gone for however long, and then there's basically a scene when after Bane robs the bank, that Batman comes back. And during that scene, you're like, yeah, Batman's back. And you also get that sort of effect when Batman comes back to Gotham City, like later in the film, right? Now, Avengers has heaps of these moments, right? For me, the best moment was basically Captain America. I know it's a little bit cliched, but I genuinely got tingles when Captain America rocked up, right? Like, Scarlet Witch and the Vision are fighting a losing battle against two of Thanos' henchmen, and then Cap shows up, and he beats them up real bad, and you're like, yeah, Cap. And obviously some of the other Avengers show up as well, but there's that real hero moment, and that happens heaps in this film. So I think that is also a sign that this film is really working as a superhero film. It really, really does work. So another really interesting thing for me, this film kind of got me thinking what it would be like for an individual who has never seen any of the Marvel films to watch this film. Would this film just be inexplicable? I guess people who have watched this film and who have watched the other Marvel films would probably give this quite a high score. But for someone who has never seen any of these Marvel films, there are so many scenes when you think about it that are just completely, like, you wouldn't understand. They'd be inscrutable because you'd have no context. Like, the scene in Wakanda where Black Panther walks up to Bucky and gives Bucky a case with a metal arm. And there's basically nothing said. Like, if you didn't know Bucky was the Winter Soldier, you didn't know the context of Wakanda or any of this, you'd just be like, why has this film suddenly shifted to this scene with a man giving another man a bionic arm? What is going on here? I mean, the other really, I think the closest I'll get to kind of understanding that is there is a big reveal in this film. Basically, when Thanos goes to find the Soul Stone. And the guardian of this Soul Stone is this sort of specter that's kind of floating around. And then the specter takes off its hood, and it's the Red Skull. It's really weird, right? But it's the Red Skull. And, you know, some of the people I was watching this film with did not remember who this guy was from Captain America, right? They're like, who the hell is this guy? Like, why is this guy important? Why is this guy with the Red Skull just wandering around in this barren planet? Now, obviously, if you know the Red Skull, you're like, oh my god, the Red Skull is still alive. I guess there's going to be a next Captain America film. But, you know, again, it's... if you don't really understand the context, these films, I imagine, this film in particular, I imagine, is pretty confusing. So, in conclusion, I love this film. It was a great film. It's a really enjoyable film. It's surprisingly tense. It has real stakes. It's peak Marvel, basically. Peak Marvel. It has a really interesting villain, probably the most interesting Marvel villain. And it's got sort of really great character moments and heaps of really just fun moments if you've kind of watched the Marvel films in the past. I definitely recommend this film. You should definitely go see it if you like superhero films, and I give it 4.5 stars. Thanks for listening to this review.